Representative Kislak. And then I think we have Representative Sanchez.
Hi, thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee. I am really pleased to be in front of you presenting. I actually don't know if you put in the bill number, and I don't have the bill number in front of me. So, thank you. H5763, which is a bill that would require us to include equity impact statements together with our legislation, much like there is a summary appended to the end of the bill. You may recall that Representative Cassar brought this to the House for the first time last year, and I am really honored to be sponsoring this legislation this year. The bill that I'm sponsoring is part of a package of equity impact statement bills where we would be more deliberate in our work as a General Assembly. This particular bill would ask us to draft an equity statement and attach it to our legislation. If we believe in building an inclusive and an equitable state, and I really hope and think that we do, we should be acknowledging that our policies in housing, education, healthcare, criminal justice, and more affect different populations among us differently, often without any intention or meaning behind it. And I know that if we don't deliberately think about what we're doing, we might not take the time to consider the possible positive and negative consequences of what we are doing. So, an example, what are we asking for? A few sentences. We could ask our advocacy partners to help with them or write them ourselves. I brought a little, some props just sitting on my desk. Maybe you also have issue briefs from Kids Count, or the annual fact book is a great place to go to start to think about how our legislation might help or hurt communities. I have two examples that I want to present, but really every bill that we just heard introduced, we could go through and make an equity impact statement about how Representative Stewart's bill will help folks with mobility impairments, about how voting, we heard Secretary Amore testify about how new American citizens will be positively impacted by same-day registration because they will be able to vote if they become citizens within the first 30 days. We could go on and on. My two quick examples are, first, Representative Morales's bill to replace lead pipes. It's an issue near and dear to my heart that I have been working on for many years. An equity impact statement might say something like, Providence Water currently requires that homeowners pay to replace the portion of lead pipe that runs under their property. However, many landlords choose not to pay this amount, and some homeowners cannot afford this. This disproportionately affects low-income tenants and homeowners, many of whom are Black and Latino. This bill creates a pathway for full lead service line replacement and will reduce or eliminate the disparity in lead service lines and line replacement. A few sentences that I pulled together quickly based on my knowledge and other information that is easily available. We could certainly go more in depth if we wanted to, but this bill does not require that. My second short example is about my adoption confirmation bill, which was heard last week. For that bill, I would say and point out as my equity impact statement that this bill will primarily help LGBTQ families, but not exclusively, and it will help LGBTQ families adopt our children without having to pay a lawyer, go through a home study, and other time-consuming processes that heterosexual married couples don't have to go through. So these statements would be attached to the end of our bills. They would create a pathway for us to be intentional about our work, that we could then make sure that we're doing what we intend to and mean to do with our legislation. putting it out there creates a way for us to be deliberate in our actions and to pass more equitable legislation for our state. It is so much better to have these conversations before we enact legislation than after we do. There's a lot of data out there about how past drug statutes, both at the state level and nationally, for example, created a lot of inequity in the way that they were enacted and implemented. I'm proud that we're part of a General Assembly that is fixing some of that inequity with our expungement of marijuana convictions. And here today is an opportunity for us to be deliberate and to say what we're doing and make sure that we don't pass inequitable legislation in the future and that we talk about unwinding some of the inequities of the past. Thank you very much.
Deputy Speaker Hall.
Thank you, Representative Kislak. I understand what you're trying to do and what you're doing for the state of Rhode Island. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Next, we're going to return to House Bill 5763 from Representative Kislak to hear testimony from other witnesses. The first witness we have signed up is Kelly Nevins, followed by Kristina Contreras Fox. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. It's a pleasure to be here to be in support of this bill. My name is Kelly Nevins. I'm the CEO of the Women's Fund of Rhode Island. We invest in women and girls with the goal of achieving gender equity through systemic change. Often you hear me up here at the State House talking about issues of equity, and so it makes perfect sense that we would be in support of simply having our legislators consider the impact that their bills might make on marginalized communities before those bills are heard in committee and then go to the floor for a vote. This week, Tuesday, was Equal Pay Day. It is the day that all women's wages catch up to what all men's wages were earned in a calendar year. So we had to work 2.5 months into 2023 to make what men earned in 2022. 40% of women are the sole breadwinners for their families. Many women had to drop out of the workforce because childcare wasn't available or became too expensive and they needed to be at home caring for their families. That meant that that wage gap that I just talked about actually expanded over COVID. And there are some experts who say that if we do nothing to close the gender wage gap, it will take over 100 years to close. We also, as a result, have gender wealth and health gaps. Why is this all important? It's important because if we ask our legislators to consider the impact of the bills that they are putting forward, even though they are doing so presumably because they are doing it with good intent, simply taking a moment to think about those communities that will be most impacted by their bills can help all of us to understand whether these are bills that we should be supporting. Otherwise, the thing that we have to depend on are the people who come up to testify for and against these bills. And if we're talking about equity, that means that many people won't be able to be here at the State House. Jobs may be preventing them, transportation may be preventing them, childcare may be preventing them from coming to the State House to talk about why something impacts them. There were several bills that were heard this evening, that we believe would benefit from having these equity statements made. It's a low bar to reach to consider the impact that a bill might have on a particular population. There are many groups out there that exist that would be willing to help you figure out if it's going to have some sort of disparate impact, including the Women's Fund, including Rhode Island Kids Count, including the Economic Progress Institute. our many colleges and universities in the state, I'm sure would all stand ready to provide some background information for you to make a simple 2 to 3 sentence equity statement. That's my spiel. I would just also like to offer support for the same-day voter registration bill. The very first speaker, the young gentleman who came up from Brown University, did the equity impact statement in his presentation and talked about how it was young people and also predominantly low-income Black and brown people who stood to benefit from that bill. Simple 2-sentence statement that could be used in support of that could be added to that bill so that we all could understand what kind of impact it would make. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Nevins from members of the committee? Seeing none, Kristina is next. Chairman Hull, just want to make sure that we have your votes recorded in the affirmative on the first 2 items on the calendar.
We went over that, yes.
We did. Okay, great. Thank you. I win that argument. Welcome, Kristina.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristina Contreras Fox. My pronouns are she, they, ella, and I am the Director of Policy for the Rhode Island Black Business Association. So equity in practice means allocating resources and opportunities as needed to create equal outcomes for all community members. Black and brown business owners historically and currently are shut out from resources and opportunities afforded to white business owners, loans and capital especially, to the detriment of Black Rhode Islanders and their families. The Rhode Island Black Business Association is proud to support Representative Kislak's Bill 5763 because it will help further equity in our state. So this bill would require General Assembly members to provide a short explanation about how the bills they introduce will impact equity. This may mean that those who didn't consider the equity impact of a bill will now have to consider it. Good. Some in office may not have experienced the same inequities and resulting hardships as the people who would be impacted by the policies that our legislators debate and vote on. And it's important to remember, inequity is extremely expensive, but equity grows the economy. And take, for example, Black and brown-owned businesses. If Rhode Island grew the Black business ownership rate to meet the national average, even Black-owned businesses without employees would have a multiplier effect, creating nearly 10,000 jobs, increasing Black median household by $1,000 annually, and reducing Black unemployment by 25%. So that's more families with income to meet basic needs and have savings for emergencies and retirement, more people going to higher education institutes without student loan debt looming overhead, fewer Rhode Islanders utilizing safety net resources. Passing equitable policy is the only way our state will get here. H 5763 lays a much needed and secure foundation for that to happen. So please give this bill your full support and pass it to the full floor with recommendation of passage. Thank you so much, and may the road always rise up to meet you.
Thank you, Kristina. Any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Next witness we have is Weayonnoh Nelson, and I'm having trouble making out the rest of the last name. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Weayonnoh Nelson-Davies, and I'm the Executive Director of the Economic Progress Institute. I am here in strong support of Representative Kislak Bill 5763, the Equity Impact Statement Act bill. We have also submitted written testimony to the committee. EPI and 32 policy, advocacy, and community-based organizations hosted a press conference on Tuesday to launch an equity impact campaign. It was moved from the State House to Zoom because of the snowstorm that never came. We launched this campaign and we support this bill because we know from history, from data that most of our organizations provide through our research, from our lived experiences, and the reality we see around us, that seemingly neutral budgets and policies can be harmful and sometimes deadly, as disparities have led to disproportionately and higher rates of incarceration, poor education and health outcomes, lower socioeconomic status, unfair pay leave structures, disparities in small business loan programs, inadequate housing structures, environmental justice issues, food insecurity, gender wage gap, higher rates of poverty, and voting like we heard here today. This week, the State of Black Rhode Island Criminal Justice Report, and Dr. Akila Dulin is here to testify and will share more, show that in 2019 alone, Rhode Island ranked as the 18th worst out of all states in the nation for its racial incarceration rate disparity, and that Black Rhode Islanders were 8.9 times more likely to be incarcerated than their white counterparts. House Bill 5763 asks legislators to be aware and consider the impact. Why? Because we still have these widespread disparities. Like we consider fiscal notes when making economic policy decisions, considering equity is critical because legislation has significant consequences on the lives of people. This bill provides legislators with a useful tool in the form of equity impact statements to pause and ask the why. Why are certain working Rhode Islanders still struggling to meet ends meet, as reported in our 2020 Rhode Island Standard of Need report, which I have here and can share with the committee? Why do children with disability not have access to special education services? Why do we need equal pay day? Because women are still being paid less than men for doing the same job. Why are Black Rhode Islanders incarcerated at such higher rates? I said this last year, and I'll say it here again. As lawmakers, you have tremendous power to enact policies that mitigate disparities and support all Rhode Islanders. Equity is not about special treatment or giving more. It is about getting us to the all. It is about making sure that all residents have the same opportunities, and it is about providing sound and fair laws and policies. It communicates to us, your constituents, your fellow Rhode Islanders, that you acknowledge these roadblocks and disparities that prevent some Rhode Islanders from thriving because of their race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, disability, or age. An equity impact statement tells us that you see and value us enough to consider the missteps of the past so that they are not repeated, and that you are prepared to prevent harm going forward because you want to see all Rhode Islanders thrive. Rhode Island can become one of the leaders in the country and join the 9 other states, including Connecticut and Maine, that have passed equity impact statement legislation. I urge you, committee, to please advance this out of committee and pass this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you again. The next witness we have is Akila Dulin. Then we have Steve Ahlquist and Paige Clausius-Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This is my first time testifying ever, and it's been an incredible experience watching everyone testify. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Akila Dulin, and I'm an associate professor at Brown University School of Public Health and affiliated with the Center for Health Promotion and Health Equity. Of course, my statements today are not reflective of the institution, but they do reflect the comments on behalf of the State of Black Rhode Island Initiative, which is designed to identify indicators of well-being for Black Rhode Islanders, contextualize those indicators from a historical and current context, and advocate for policy changes where needed. And that is no more glaring than in the case of criminal justice. Our data show that over the past 11 years, Black Rhode Islanders have been incarcerated at a rate 8, 9, or 10 times higher than their white counterparts. And it's not because Black people are more criminal, it's because we need to take a look at how the policies and legislation being passed differentially and disproportionately impact Black Rhode Islanders negatively. This is not new. Former Director Stokes' data from the Truth of the Matter initiative showed that disparities have been persistent since the 1700s or 1600s. And one way that we can address or begin to make changes is to introduce or support equity impact assessments to really understand and begin to identify how are Black Rhode Islanders and others being disproportionately affected. If we want to uphold the values that we say we have, then we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be treated fairly and equitably, and that we undo the harms that legislation has caused historically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great job for your first time.
Thank you.
Any questions or, yes, Representative Tanzi.
One quick question. I know others who have testified have offered their expertise. Do you think it's something that Brown would be interested in weighing in on, helping us to create and craft these?
I can't speak on behalf of Brown per se, but I can speak on behalf of the Center for Health Promotion and Health Equity, and there are many faculty in the School of Public Health as well who'd be wholeheartedly supportive of helping inform the legislation.
And perhaps an opportunity for students to also get some experience.
Yes, they'd love that.
Thank you. And you did great.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Steve Ahlquist. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll be pretty quick. I like this bill. I liked this bill last year when it was put in by Representative Cassar. It really excited me, the concept of it. To me, this is a bill about information. And in all cases I can think of, knowing more is better than knowing less. I can't think of a single example of how not including an equity statement would be better for the process, because it's just more information, more insight into what we're doing. So equity statements make sense. I see bills pass here all the time without the full implications of the effects upon people and communities being known, right? We don't know sometimes what these bills are going to do. There's things we might not consider, and I think equity statements can get us closer to a conversation to seeing what that is. There are attempts to make our best guesses about these consequences, and the events of negative consequences, maybe we could see those coming and prevent them, mitigate them. So that's a really good idea. I just want to bring up a bit of an equity statement on a previous bill, CRMC bills from Rep. Tanzi. We talked about the marina in New Shoreham, and about 2 years, during that time, about 2 years before the Supreme Court thing, there was a case in South Providence, and they were trying to stop the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure there, the communities there. And they didn't have $660,000 to fight this. They didn't have a lawyer. They had a lawyer who sometimes showed up part-time to write a thing here and there, but it was free and it wasn't sufficient. They did not have their rights protected because the CRMC was acting in a very racist way towards them, and they couldn't even fight back effectively. And that's something about equity, right? That's something that we need our CRMC to be, or any of the places in Rhode Island, to be able to do well. And one other note that occurred to me that came up, it's my opinion, and I've seen this before, that not filling the $150,000 CRMC hearing officer position allows the governor to create surpluses. You pass legislation to fill certain positions to do things, and then by not filling those positions, and he does it in many, many ways, he suddenly has a surplus at the end of the year. And what happens to that surplus? It's turned into, basically tax breaks for corporate interests. This is how this governor's been operating since he came in, and I think it was something that the General Assembly might want to take into account. I think that's also an equity idea, and it's also something we might want to think about. I know you can't force him to spend this money, but at the same time, you should be thinking about where that money is ultimately going, and then think about when he tries to convert this into giveaways, maybe think about how you could use that money more effectively to achieve equity. So that's all pretty much I have. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions from members of the committee?
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Paige Clausius-Parks. Welcome.
Hello, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Paige Clausius-Parks, Executive Director of Rhode Island Kids Count, and we would like to voice our strong support for House Bill 5763. I'd like to thank Representative Kislak for introducing this important bill and for all of the co-sponsors as well. So there are persistent, widespread, and unacceptable disparities by health, safety, education, and economic well-being of children and youth by race, ethnicity, immigration status, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, and other factors. As been mentioned in earlier testimonies, Rhode Island Kids Count, we publish data on these unacceptable disparities in our annual Rhode Island Kids Count fact book and in other publications. We increase awareness around the disparities increase understanding about the root causes of these disparities, and identify the policies Rhode Island should put in place to reduce and eliminate these disparities. My written testimony includes a couple of charts that are examples. So the first chart, we've heard about incarceration in previous testimonies. Our chart in here talks about the children of incarcerated parents. So a policymaker could look at a chart like this and see how does incarceration impact children based on race. So when you look at this chart, you can see that Black children, Native American children, and Hispanic children are disproportionately impacted by policies we make around incarceration. So it is currently legal to discriminate in housing, employment, access to higher education, and public benefits if a person has been formerly incarcerated. These policies, you can see from a chart like this, disproportionately impact children of color due to the systems of mass incarceration. This proposed bill would ask legislators to consider how policies can be changed to reduce the disparities in incarceration and consider the long-term effects of a parent's incarceration on their family and children. The second chart in my testimony is around the mental health status of youth by sexual orientation. This chart clearly shows that LGBTQ youth are more likely to experience depression, consider, or attempt suicide compared to their heterosexual peers. This bill would require legislation to consider if proposed legislation would result in better supports for these young people in their schools and in their communities, which will promote better mental health outcomes. As the bill states, past legislation in Rhode Island has been implemented without attention to equity. Some of this legislation has had negative impacts on certain communities, and others legislation has been drafted and passed without attention to how it could be improved to reduce or eliminate disparities. So this bill would require language that is simple and understandable, preferably with great charts, right? So that you're able to better understand how your legislation will impact communities. Currently, there are 9 states, so Colorado, Florida, Iowa, Maine, Maryland, New Jersey, Oregon, and Virginia, and yes, I said Florida, that have implemented mechanisms for developing and considering equity impact statements. So why can't we? As you all know, the mission of Rhode Island's Kids Count is to improve the health, safety, education, economic well-being, and development of our kids with a commitment to equity. We urge you to support this bill, and we stand ready to help and assist. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you again for your
Thank
testimony.
you.
But that will conclude the hearing on House Bill 5763.